And when you think about mechanics, we think about them being introduced, new ways to use them, all of these. Now, this is a really tough thing to do with the open world, because in your main missions, that's when you're kind of going to unlock a lot of them. Not always necessarily. If you have RPG trees, you might get different kind of power-ups based in how you progress. You know, you earn enough XP, points, currency, unlock these new elements, and that'll go from there. But I believe, and I think I am right here, in most kind of currency payouts, they're much higher within the main missions again. So you know that you're probably going to earn more XP doing your main missions versus your open world, which now goes back to the point I was trying to make, which is mechanics. So you're probably going to unlock your mechanics inside your main missions, which goes back to the control section I mentioned earlier, when you as a designer have more control to pick when to unlock them, because you're crafting that very first experience. Especially if it's a new mechanic, you want the players to get it very quickly and be in a safe environment. If you think about Breath of the Wild, when they did the elements of, say, the tablet's powers, those were the first 5 shrines. I think it was 5, but those were the first mandatory missions you had to do. You had to, as a player, go off and do them before you could progress, because it was in these shrines that they, as the designers, had control of the space. If they tried to teach you that in an open world situation, then you're probably going to be attacked. They don't know, due to patrols, right? All these elements, maybe the weather conditions have a certain impact on gameplay, and you kind of lose that time to learn and not be caught off guard. So those can be one of it. So you're more likely to introduce mechanics in your main missions rather than open world. Not that I'm sure there isn't examples of this, just traditionally. So what that means again for open world isn't just the fact that you're not used to teach them, but the control of when to introduce them. This can be one of the hardest things because of how big, in terms of the scope, games can get. So really you have to think about, how do you introduce that, right? Or maybe if you're making open world content and the mechanics haven't been, say, laid out in progression, in terms of, we're going to introduce mechanic A at quarter 1, but B and C will come in at quarter 2, and then mechanic D will come in at the quarter 4. So what you might have to do is you might have to design open-endedly, right? That there is a solution for players who have these mechanics, so that there's an option for them to do it. But if you don't, well, then you can still complete it without necessarily needing that mechanic in hand. And this comes down to another section in terms of the difference between open world and more linear, is the fact that you roughly know, especially as we talk about with more RPG elements, when the player is going to interact with the main missions, because they need a certain amount of XP to get through. And what you'll probably have happen is your designers or RPG economy designers will be looking at how much XP the player can unlock or max out. Say if they were like, right, this first section of the open world, I'm going to complete everything in here even before I do the main missions. They know roughly where the level and a level of the player will max out. So they design the main missions to kind of encourage players to go off and explore and come back. When you're designing for open world, you don't necessarily know. You have an idea, and a high percentage is the player will interact with the open world when they're at that level of visiting your area, but some might leave it and come back when they're overpowered. Now, this isn't necessarily something that you as a level designer have to worry about, because it's down to the balancing of AI, your weapons, and all of that. But it just shows again of like, oh, okay, you don't have as much control, right? So it's all different elements there. Now, there is a bit more, and maybe I'll come back to this topic just because I think it is a fascinating one. But those are kind of some of the main differences. So let's just kind of go over them overall. I don't remember the exact order, but we'll try and remember it together. Is overall in terms of length and beats, so how long these missions are in terms of duration, but also how many beats there are. When you talk about beats, I mean overall objectives. It's normally kill or interact 2 to 3 beats at most in an open world, which in a main mission is a lot more. In terms of size, with what we mentioned with duration, we also mentioned the kind of shapes. We had more corridor arena versus just arena. The design approach, whether that be 360 or 1 to 2 entrances in linear, so you have the more crafted feel, as well as time and money invested into these, because we said your main missions should be the more wow and eye-catching moments. Then in terms of mechanics, when the mechanics are going to be introduced, And finally, understanding when the player actually plays it, because you know when they're more likely to do it with, say, your linear versus your open world.